The millionaire's baby couldn't walk until the new maid changed everything with a miracle in the backyard. The sleek leather briefcase slipped from the hands of Daniel Vanderbilt and hit the polished hardwood floor with a sharp thud, but he didn't even hear it. His eyes were locked on the scene unfolding through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling backyard. An image his brain simply refused to process. His son, little Alex, the boy whom the best specialists in Europe and the United States had condemned to a wheelchair for life, was not sitting down. The boy was standing. He wasn't strapped to any machine or held up by medical harnesses. He was all alone, his little orthopedic shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass, wobbling like a leaf in the wind, but standing. 2 meters away from him, Rosie, the new housekeeper who'd barely been at the estate for 3 weeks, was kneeling down. She was wearing her spotless blue uniform and a pair of rubber gloves, bright, flashy yellow ones that clashed with the quiet elegance of the Hamptons mansion. She wasn't looking at him with pity. She was looking at him with a radiant smile, clapping her gloved hands in a soft rhythm, cheering him on. "Come on, my little champ." Rosie's voice came through the glass muffled but full of vibrant energy. "You are strong. Come to my hands." Daniel felt the air rush out of his lungs. Terror took over. The doctors had been clear. Little Alex's spine was fragile. One fall could be fatal. That woman was risking the life of his only heir. "No!" Daniel screamed, breaking his paralysis. He ran to the sliding door, shoving it open violently. The sound of the glass crashing against the frame boomed like a gunshot, but in the backyard, the miracle continued, oblivious to his fury. Little Alex let out a crystal-clear laugh, one that Daniel hadn't heard in years. The boy, totally focused on those yellow gloves of Rosie, which were waving him over like 2 beacons of light, lifted 1 foot, then the other. 1, 2, 3 steps. Daniel stopped dead in the middle of the patio, his heart hammering in his throat. Time seemed to stand still. He watched his son's little legs shaking from the massive effort. He saw the sweat on the boy's forehead and the absolute determination in his dark eyes. Little Alex took a 4th step, but he lost his balance. His body tipped dangerously to the right. "I've got you!" Rosie lunged forward with cat-like reflexes. Her hands, still covered in yellow rubber, caught the boy in midair before he hit the ground. She wrapped him in a protective hug, rolling onto the grass to cushion the impact with her own body. Little Alex, far from crying, burst into laughter, hugging the maid's neck with surprising strength. Daniel reached them panting heavily, his face red with anger and fear. He snatched the boy from Rosie's arms with a rough movement, frantically checking him for injuries. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Daniel roared, his voice echoing across the backyard. "You could have killed him! I explicitly told you he cannot get out of his chair. He's a disabled child, for God's sake." Rosie stood up quickly, smoothing her white apron over her blue uniform. She didn't lower her gaze. She didn't tremble before the millionaire who made his employees shake with just a single glance. Her warm brown eyes shone with an intensity that unsettled Daniel. "No, Mr. Vanderbilt," she said with a firm yet respectful voice. "He isn't disabled. He's a child who needed to believe he could do it, and he just walked 4 steps. You saw it. I saw recklessness that almost cost him his spine." Daniel pressed little Alex tight against his chest. The boy started kicking, not because he was in pain, but because he wanted to go back to Rosie. "You're fired. Get out of my house before I call the police for criminal negligence." Rosie took a step back, hurt by the injustice, but before she could answer, a small hand pulled on the lapel of Daniel's suit. "Duh. Daniel froze, looking down at his son. Little Alex never spoke. His development had stalled along with his legs after his mother's tragic car accident. The boy pointed his index finger towards Rosie. "Daddy, look!" The child squirmed in his father's arms, fighting to get down. Daniel, stunned, lowered him slowly, not letting go completely, fearing he would collapse like a rag doll. But little Alex planted his feet on the ground, grabbed his father's pants with one hand, and with the other pointed at Rosie. "I walked." The word was a whisper, but to Daniel it sounded louder than thunder. "I walked." His 4-year-old son, written off by medical science, had just said he walked. Daniel looked up at Rosie. She no longer seemed like a simple domestic worker. With her cleaning gloves and her messy bun, she seemed like the only person in the world who understood what had just happened. "How?" asked Daniel with a broken voice, his arrogance crumbling. "The doctors said his nerves were dead." "Nerves need orders, sir," Rosie answered softly, slowly taking off a yellow glove. "And fear is a bad boss. I just gave him a reason to move." Daniel was about to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a plea, when the sound of heels clicking against the stone pavement broke the magical moment. "Daniel, what is going on here?" The shrill voice of Ivy. His sister-in-law filled the air. "I saw everything from the balcony. That savage threw the boy to the ground. Call security right now." The atmosphere changed in a second. The fragile connection that had formed between the father, the son, and the maid shattered before the intrusion of Ivy's poison. The unjust accusation. Ivy descended the backyard steps like a perfect storm, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than Rosie's annual salary. Her face, usually a mask of calculated coldness, showed theatrical indignation. She lunged at Daniel, putting a hand on little Alex's shoulder with feigned possessiveness. "My poor little angel," she exclaimed, looking at the boy as if he were broken, though he rejected her with a gesture. "Daniel, are you blind? That woman, that servant, was forcing him. I saw her dragging him. It's obvious she wants to hurt him so she can sue us later. That's what these people do." Rosie felt the blood rushing to her cheeks. She squeezed the yellow gloves in her hand until her knuckles turned white. "Mrs. Ivy, that is a lie," said Rosie, taking a step forward. Her voice was clear, without a tremor of submission. "Little Alex walked because he wanted to. Because we practice every day when you aren't looking." Daniel snapped his head up. "What do you mean, every day?" he asked, his tone darkening again. The doubt sown by Ivy was starting to take root. "You've been doing this behind my back for days, without medical supervision." "It's a crime, Daniel," Ivy interrupted, seizing the opening. "She's playing doctor with your son. She could leave him paralyzed forever. You have to fire her right now and make sure she never works in any decent house in New York again." Daniel looked at Rosie. The momentary gratitude he'd felt seeing his son walk was being devoured by the fear of an overprotective father. The logic of Ivy, however cruel, made sense. If something went wrong, the fault would be his for allowing it. "Rosie." Daniel's jaw tightened. He became the cold entrepreneur again, the businessman. "My sister-in-law is right about one thing. You are not authorized to perform therapy. What you did was gross insubordination. You put the most valuable asset of my life at risk." Little Alex, sensing the tension, started to cry. Not a cry of pain, but of anguish. He reached his arms out to Rosie, screaming, "Nana! Nana!" "The boy wants to go to her because she manipulates him," hissed Ivy into Daniel's ear. "Children get attached to whoever gives them candy, not whoever educates them." Rosie ignored Ivy and looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "Mr. Vanderbilt, you can fire me if you want. You can throw me out on the street without a reference. But before you do, ask yourself something. Why has the most valuable asset of your life made more progress in 3 weeks, playing and dancing with me, than in 2 years with doctors who treat him like a broken piece of furniture?" The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel looked at his son, who was still crying, reaching out toward the young woman in the blue uniform. He looked at the boy's legs, which still seemed to vibrate with the energy of the recent effort. "Go to your room," Daniel finally ordered, his voice hoarse. "Do not go near the boy until I decide otherwise. I am going to call Dr. Berman. If he finds a single scratch, a single new injury on little Alex's back, I won't just fire you, Rosie. I will make sure you go to jail." Rosie nodded slowly. A solitary tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly with the back of her hand. She crouched slightly to be at little Alex's eye level, even from a distance. "I'm right here, my brave boy," she whispered to him, though Daniel heard every word. "Don't stop trying." She turned around and walked toward the service entrance with the dignity of a queen, carrying her cleaning gloves as if they were a royal scepter. Ivy smiled triumphantly and turned to Daniel. "You did the right thing, darling. Tomorrow I'll bring in a certified nurse. A serious woman, not a frustrated dancer. I will handle everything." But Daniel wasn't listening to her. He was watching his son, supporting himself on his legs, try to take a step toward where Rosie had gone. The boy fell to his knees and pounded the ground in frustration, screaming again, "Nana!" That night, the mansion felt bigger and colder than ever. Daniel was in his study, pouring himself a double whiskey. The preliminary medical report lay on his desk. Dr. Berman had come for an emergency visit. He had been checking the boy for an hour, taking x-rays with portable equipment. Daniel was afraid to read the conclusion. What if Ivy was right? What if the effort had damaged his spine? He took the paper with a trembling hand. His eyes scanned the technical terms until he reached the final notes. Patient: Alexander Vanderbilt. Observations: unusual increase in muscle mass in the quads and calves. Nervous response improved by 40% compared to the last checkup. No injuries. There are signs of positive muscle fatigue. Doctor's note: whatever you are doing, do not stop. It is the first time I've seen progress in this case. Daniel dropped the paper. The glass of whiskey was forgotten. "Do not stop," he murmured. He ran up the stairs, ignoring his exhaustion. He needed to talk to her. He needed to apologize. He reached the hallway of the service wing. The door to Rosie's room was ajar. He was about to knock, but he heard Ivy's voice inside. He stopped, pressing himself against the wall. "Listen to me well, you starving wretch." Ivy's voice was a poisonous whisper. "I don't care if the boy walks, flies, or does magic tricks. That boy is my ticket to managing the family trust. If he gets cured, Daniel will stop depending on me. If he gets cured, I lose my power. So you are going to leave tomorrow, either the easy way or the hard way." Daniel felt a glacial chill run down his spine. Through the crack in the door, he saw Rosie sitting on her bed, holding an old photo against her chest. "I won't leave, ma'am," Rosie replied, trembling but firm, "because that boy needs me, and Mr. Daniel is a good man. He is just blinded by grief. He will realize who you really are." Just like that. Ivy let out a cruel laugh. "Daniel believes whatever I tell him. And tomorrow, when he finds evidence that you stole from him, he'll kick you out himself. Enjoy your last night under an expensive roof, Cinderella." Ivy left the room, slamming the door. Daniel had to hide quickly in a dark alcove in the hallway to avoid being seen. His heart was beating with a mixture of fury and revelation. Now he knew the medical truth, and he was beginning to suspect the dark truth of his own family. But Daniel was a strategist. If he went in now and confronted Ivy, she would deny everything and play the victim. He needed to see how far she would go. He needed to protect his son, but he also needed to unmask the enemy sleeping under his own roof. He looked at Rosie's closed door. He wanted to go in and hug her, to thank her for giving him back hope, but he remembered Ivy's threat. "When he finds evidence that you stole from him," Daniel clenched his fists. The war for his son's life had just begun, and his only ally was the woman he had almost sent to prison a few hours ago. He had to be smart. He returned to his room in silence, but he didn't sleep. He stayed watching the monitor of the camera in little Alex's room. The boy slept hugging one of the yellow cleaning gloves that Rosie, in an oversight or an act of love, had left him. Tomorrow would be a decisive day, and Daniel Vanderbilt was ready to play. The medical secret. The sun was barely beginning to dye the sky orange over the Vanderbilt estate, but the kitchen was already buzzing with silent activity. Rosie was standing in front of the high-end stove, rhythmically stirring a small copper pot with a wooden spoon. The smell wasn't coffee or toast. It was a sharp blend of eucalyptus, rosemary, and something earthier, almost ancient, with a hint of lavender from her grandma's old recipe. Daniel walked into the kitchen without making a sound. He was wearing the same clothes from yesterday, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot from no sleep. He stood in the doorway, just watching. He'd spent the whole night torn between what he read in the medical report, his son's undeniable improvement, and that poisonous conversation he'd overheard between Ivy and Rosie. He knew his sister-in-law was ambitious, but to what extent? And Rosie, was she a guardian angel, or just a lucky gambler? "Smells like witchcraft," Daniel said, his raspy voice breaking the silence. Rosie didn't jump or scream. She turned slowly, lowering the stove flame. "Smells like the countryside, sir," she corrected gently, drying her hands on her apron. "It's a balm for the joints. My grandma used it on horses when they hurt their legs, and later on the village elders." Daniel stepped closer, inspecting the greenish liquid. "My son isn't a horse, Rosie. Or an old man. No, sir. But muscles are muscles, and pain is pain." Rosie looked up, challenging the millionaire's exhaustion. "The doctors give him pills to numb his nerves. This is to wake them up. The heat of the rosemary gets the blood moving. The massage reminds his legs that they're still there." Daniel remembered Dr. Berman's report. Unusual increase in muscle mass. Improved nerve response. Science was backing the country girl. "The doctor said little Alex is getting better," Daniel blurted out, looking for a reaction. Rosie's eyes lit up. A genuine, dazzling smile broke the morning tension. "Really?" she sighed, bringing her hands to her chest. "I knew it. I felt his little legs pushing back yesterday. I knew I wasn't crazy." The reaction was so pure it disarmed Daniel. There was no calculation in her joy, only relief. Daniel poured himself a glass of water, turning his back to hide his own emotion. "You have 1 week," he said, downing the water in one gulp. "I'm going to let you continue with your methods, but on one condition. No going out to the backyard without supervision. And if little Alex cries from pain even once, it's over." "He won't cry from pain, sir. He'll cry from effort, like a champion," Rosie promised. Just then, the sharp clicking of heels echoed in the hallway. Ivy walked into the kitchen, flawless in a cream silk dress, hair perfectly styled. She stopped dead when she saw Daniel and Rosie talking so close, in a domestic intimacy that turned her stomach. "Daniel, darling," Ivy said with a tight smile, ignoring Rosie. "I thought this woman would be packing her bags by now. I already contacted the nursing agency. They have a German specialist ready to—" "Cancel it," Daniel interrupted without looking at her, setting the glass on the counter. Ivy blinked, her smile faltering. "Excuse me?" "Rosie stays. Berman's report is positive. Whatever she's doing, it works. Little Alex stays with her." Ivy's face transformed for a split second, a mask of pure hate that Rosie caught from the corner of her eye. But Daniel missed because he was already walking out. "But Daniel, it's dangerous," Ivy tried to argue, her voice rising in pitch. "It's my decision, Ivy." Daniel walked out of the kitchen, leaving a trail of undeniable authority behind him. Ivy stood frozen, her breathing heavy. She turned slowly to face Rosie. The maid had gone back to her cooking pot, stirring the ointment calmly, but her shoulders were tight with tension. "Enjoy your victory, Nana," Ivy whispered, leaning in so close that Rosie could smell her expensive, sickly sweet perfume. "But be careful. When you climb too high, the fall can kill you. And in this house, accidents happen all the time." Rosie gripped the handle of the wooden spoon. "I'm not afraid of accidents, ma'am. I'm afraid of evil people, and God protects me from them." Ivy let out a dry, humorless laugh. "God doesn't come into this mansion, darling. The only thing allowed in here is money, and you have absolutely nothing." Ivy stormed out of the kitchen, her high heels clicking a silent threat against the floor. Rosie stood there alone, staring at the boiling liquid. She knew she had bought herself some time, but she also knew she had just painted a target on her back. Little Alex was getting better, and that was the only thing that mattered. She had to protect him, not just from the paralysis, but from the woman who was supposed to be taking care of him. To add a layer of comfort, she whispered a quick prayer her grandma taught her, invoking strength from family roots back in rural Virginia. The sabotage. Dinner at the Vanderbilt estate was always a solemn affair, almost like a funeral. The main dining room, with its mahogany table for 12 people, was usually occupied only by Daniel and Ivy, with the silence barely broken by the clinking of silver cutlery. But tonight, the atmosphere was different. Little Alex was in his high chair, laughing and banging the table with his plastic spoon, while Rosie stood beside him, cutting his chicken into tiny pieces. Daniel watched his son from the head of the table. For the first time in months, he didn't feel the crushing weight of the family tragedy. The boy had color in his cheeks again. His eyes were sparkling. "Eat up, my brave little soldier, so those muscles can grow big and strong," Rosie whispered to him softly. Ivy, sitting to Daniel's right, barely touched her wine. Her eyes darted back and forth from Rosie to Daniel, calculating, measuring. The maid's presence in the dining room, even to help the child, was an insult to her. But Ivy had a plan. She had spent the afternoon in her room tampering with vials, wearing latex gloves so she wouldn't leave any fingerprints. "Rosie?" Ivy said suddenly, her voice dripping with sickly sweetness. "Isn't it time for little Alex's vitamins? The doctor said he has to take them with food." Rosie nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I have them right here." Rosie pulled a small amber glass bottle with a pharmacy label out of her apron pocket. She set it on the table next to the boy's plate and turned toward the sideboard to get a glass of water. It all happened in a split second. "Oh!" Ivy cried out, throwing her napkin to the floor with a sharp, sudden motion. "My earring! The diamond fell out!" Daniel, with the instinct of a gentleman, immediately ducked down to look under the table. From the sideboard, Rosie also turned her head, instinctively looking toward the noise. In that split second where no one was watching, Ivy's hand struck like a cobra. She pulled an identical bottle from her lap and swapped it with the one on the table. The original bottle vanished into the folds of her dress. "Here it is," Ivy said a second later, lifting her napkin and pretending to pick something up from the floor. False alarm. It was just caught on the lace. "I'm such a fool." Daniel stood back up, brushing off his suit. "Be more careful, Ivy." Rosie came back with the glass of water. She hadn't seen a thing. Nobody had seen a thing. She took the bottle from the table, the fake bottle, and poured the drops onto the spoon. The liquid was the same color, but the density was slightly different, something only a chemist would have noticed. "Open wide." "Here comes the airplane," Rosie said, smiling. Little Alex opened his mouth, trusting her. He swallowed the drops without protesting, though he made a little face. "It tastes yucky," the boy mumbled. "It's medicine, my love. Medicine heals. It's not meant to be sweet," Rosie comforted him, giving him water and wiping the corner of his lips. Dinner continued. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Suddenly, little Alex's spoon clattered to the floor. Daniel looked up. Little Alex was blinking slowly, as if fighting to keep his eyes open. His head was swaying. "Champ?" Daniel asked, worried. "Are you sleepy?" "No," the boy tried to say, but the word came out slurred and thick. Then, the horror happened. Little Alex's eyes rolled back in his head. His body went rigid for a second, shaken by a violent spasm, and then he slumped forward, his face falling into his plate of food. "Little Alex!" Rosie's scream tore through the air. Daniel jumped from his chair, knocking the table over in the process. He reached his son in a second, lifting his little head. The boy was limp, pale as wax, and barely breathing. A thread of foam was coming out of his mouth. Son, look at me." Daniel patted his face. Desperate. Panic blinded him. All his reasoning, all his strategy evaporated at the sight of his son dying in his arms. "What's wrong with him?" Daniel screamed, looking around with wild eyes. Ivy stood up, feigning horror, covering her mouth with her hands. "Oh my God, he's been poisoned!" she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at Rosie. "It was her. She just gave him those drops. I saw the liquid looked weird." Rosie was paralyzed, hands shaking, trying to touch the boy, but Daniel shoved her with brute force, pushing her away. "Don't you touch him!" Daniel roared. His eyes, which had looked at her with hope that morning, now looked at her with the hatred of a wounded animal. "Sir, I only gave him his vitamins," Rosie sobbed, backing up until she hit the wall. "She's lying, I swear," Ivy intervened, approaching Daniel and holding his shoulders to steady him. "She probably gave him something to knock him out so he wouldn't bother her. These ignorant peasants always do that. Look at him. She's killed him, Daniel." Little Alex let out a choked moan, his breathing becoming irregular. "Call an ambulance, now!" Daniel ordered, scooping his son up in his arms and running toward the exit without waiting for anyone. Ivy stayed behind for a moment. She looked at Rosie, who was crying inconsolably on the kitchen floor. Ivy crouched down, picked up the empty bottle Rosie had left on the table, and put it in her pocket. Then she took out another bottle, one with a red skull drawn on the back label, high-potency adult sedative pills, and rolled it across the floor until it stopped near Rosie's feet. "You poor fool," Ivy murmured with an icy smile. "I told you to leave." Ivy ran after Daniel, screaming, "I'm coming with you," leaving Rosie alone in the dining room, trembling as the sirens began to howl in the distance, getting closer to take away the boy she loved like her own, and to seal her fate in a cold cell. The fake evidence. The blue and red police lights bounced off the stone walls of the Vanderbilt estate, turning the elegant facade into a nightmarish crime scene. Daniel had returned from the hospital just an hour after admitting little Alex. The doctors had managed to stabilize the boy after an emergency stomach pumping, confirming what everyone feared. A massive overdose of benzodiazepines, a potent sedative for adults. Daniel stormed into the house like a hurricane. There was no sadness in his eyes, only a cold, calculating fury. He needed someone to blame. He needed to destroy whoever had touched his son. "Inspector!" Daniel bellowed when he saw the officer in charge in the lobby. "I want you to search every inch of this place. That woman isn't just negligent, she's a criminal." "I want proof." Rosie was sitting on a dining chair, guarded by an officer. She was weeping silently, her face swollen and her uniform wrinkled. When she saw Daniel enter, she tried to stand up. "Mr. Daniel, please, believe me," she pleaded, reaching out her hands. "I would never hurt little Alex. I love him." Daniel stopped in front of her. He looked at her with such contempt that Rosie felt as if he had physically struck her. "Don't say his name," he said in a low voice, shaking with suppressed rage. "You gave him drugs, horse tranquilizers. Why? So he wouldn't be a bother? So you could slack off while he slept?" "No," screamed Rosie. "Someone switched the bottle. I gave him his vitamins." Ivy appeared on the stairs, coming down with theatrical elegance, holding a silk handkerchief to her nose, pretending to be devastated. "Daniel, darling," sobbed Ivy, approaching him and placing a hand on his arm. "The police found the bottle of sedatives rolling near her feet in the kitchen. It's obvious she tried to get rid of it when she panicked, but there's something else." Daniel turned sharply toward his sister-in-law. "What else?" "I've been checking the household accounts and things are missing," Ivy said, lowering her voice so the police wouldn't hear, though she said it loud enough. "Small items. Of value, and my watch, the gold Rolex your brother gave me. I can't find it anywhere." Daniel's eyes went wide. The betrayal now had another layer. Greed. "Search her room," Daniel ordered the officers. "I don't have anything," Rosie screamed desperately. "You can check. I'm poor, but I'm honest." Daniel didn't wait for the police. He marched toward the service wing himself, followed by Ivy and 2 officers. He entered Rosie's small room, which was neat and clean, with a soft scent of lavender. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed the dresser drawers and dumped them onto the floor. Humble clothes, old letters, and rosaries fell to the floor. "Search!" Daniel shouted, kicking a shoebox. An officer walked over to the bed and lifted the thin mattress. "Mr. Vanderbilt," called the officer. Daniel went over there. Shining under the harsh light of the ceiling bulb tucked away, between the box spring and the mattress, was the solid gold watch encrusted with diamonds. Rosie's world just stopped. From the doorway, where she'd been dragged by force, she saw the golden glint and felt the ground open up beneath her feet. That's not mine," she whispered, her voice choked with panic. "Someone planted it there. I swear on the Virgin Mary I've never seen it before." Daniel picked up the watch. It was heavy, heavy as his disappointment. He turned to Rosie. His eyes didn't hold anger anymore, just a dead, absolute coldness. He'd trusted her. He'd believed in her miracle. But it was all a lie. She was a thief, and a drug addict who used his son just to get into the safe. "Take her away," Daniel said, his voice void of any emotion. "No, Mr. Daniel." "It's a setup!" Rosie struggled as the officer grabbed her wrists to cuff her. The cold metal snapped shut with a final click. "Look at Ivy! Look at her!" Ivy stood behind Daniel wearing a mask of perfect sadness, shaking her head. "Shame on you, Rosie. And to think we welcomed you into this family," Ivy said softly. The officers shoved Rosie down the hallway. She dragged her feet, fighting them, desperately searching for Daniel's eyes, but he turned his back on her, staring out the window into the dark backyard where his son had walked just yesterday. "Check the tea!" Rosie screamed as they dragged her toward the exit, her voice cracking into a scream of pure despair. "Check the kitchen trash. Check the bottle. Don't let her win, Mr. Daniel." The front door slammed shut, silencing her screams. Daniel stood alone in the hallway. He clenched the gold watch in his fist until the edges dug into his skin. Ivy walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's over, Daniel. The boy is alive. That's all that matters. Tomorrow I'll make sure that woman rots in, prison for attempted murder and aggravated robbery." Daniel nodded slowly without looking at her. "Go to bed, Ivy. I want to be alone." When she left, with a barely visible smile on her lips, Daniel stood there staring at the closed door. The image of Rosie dancing with his son replayed in his mind over and over again. How could anyone fake that much love? The pain of betrayal was piercing, but in the back of his mind, a tiny doubt planted by Rosie's final scream began to pulse. "Check the tea. Check the bottle." Little Alex's collapse. 3 days had passed. 3 days in which the Vanderbilt estate had turned into a mausoleum. The silence was absolute, heavy, suffocating. Little Alex had come back from the hospital the day before. Physically, he was healthy. The stomach pumping had worked in time, but the boy who came back wasn't the same one who left. He sat in his wheelchair in the middle of the living room. He didn't move, didn't look at his toys. His head hung low, chin buried in his chest. His eyes, once full of spark and mischief, were now dull, staring into nothingness. "Come on, Alex." The new nurse, a German woman named Hilda, tall and stern, was trying to lift his arm for rotation exercises. "You need to cooperate. 1, 2, 1, 2. The boy let his arm go limp. As soon as Hilda let go of him, he slumped like dead weight into her lap. "Ugh," the nurse huffed in frustration. "The boy isn't cooperating, Mr. Vanderbilt. It's impossible to work like this. He has a severe emotional block." Daniel watched from the sofa, holding a glass of water he hadn't touched. He looked haggard, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. He got up and walked over to his son. He knelt down in front of him, just like Rosie used to do. "Champ." Daniel tried to put some enthusiasm in his voice, but it sounded hollow. "Remember how you walked in the backyard? Hey, let's try it with Daddy. Look, I've got your hands." Daniel took little Alex's little hands. They were cold. He tugged gently to help him up. Little Alex reacted for the first time in hours. He yanked his hands back as if Daniel burned him. "No," the boy whispered. "Yes, son. You can do this. You're strong." "No!" little Alex screamed, and then, with a voice that shattered Daniel's heart into 1,000 pieces, he started to cry. "Nana. I want Nana." Rosie. The name echoed through the room. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "Rosie can't come, son. She went away." "Bad." Little Alex hit his father's chest with his weak little fists. "Bad Daddy! You chased Nana away! I want Nana!" The boy exploded into a fit of hysterical crying, hyperventilating. Nurse Hilda stepped in quickly. "He's getting too worked up. I'm going to have to give him a mild sedative if he doesn't calm down." "No one is sedating my son," roared Daniel, jumping to his feet and scaring the nurse. "Leave him alone." Daniel stormed out of the room, unable to bear the accusing look from his own son. He walked into the kitchen, gasping for air. He leaned against the marble counter, breathing heavily. "Bad Daddy." The words drilled into his mind. He looked around the empty kitchen. Everything was spotless. Ivy had ordered a deep clean to get rid of the maid's germs, but something clicked in Daniel's memory. Check the kitchen trash. Check the jar. Rosie's scream. Daniel looked toward the back door that led to the service patio. That's where the large dumpsters were, the ones the garbage truck picked up on Thursdays. Today was Wednesday. The trash from the night of the accident had to still be there. It was crazy. It was the plea of a desperate criminal. But his son's look, the way little Alex called out for her, a child doesn't lie about love. Daniel opened the back door. The afternoon heat hit him. He walked toward the green bins, took off his suit jacket, threw it on the ground, and rolled up the sleeves of his white silk shirt. He opened the first bin. The smell of food waste was nauseating. Daniel hesitated for a second, feeling ridiculous. He was Daniel Vanderbilt, owner of half the real estate sector in the Northeast, and he was about to dig through the trash. "Do it," he ordered himself. He started pulling out black bags and ripped the first one open. Vegetable scraps, eggshells, nothing. He ripped the second one. Papers, milk cartons. He spent 10 minutes sweating, his clothes getting stained. He was about to give up when he saw a small white bag, the kind used in the downstairs bathrooms, knotted tight and hidden inside a larger black bag full of leftovers from that night's dinner. He opened it. Inside were makeup-stained paper napkins, makeup remover pads, and a small empty glass vial. Daniel fished it out with 2 fingers, lifting it up to the sunlight. It wasn't the vitamin bottle. It was a bottle of Dormiex, a potent sedative available only by strict prescription. But what froze Daniel's blood wasn't the name of the drug. It was the label. On the white paper of the label was a smudge, a greasy smudge of an intense, unmistakable red. It was a fingerprint, perfect, left by someone with red-stained fingers, or who had touched the bottle right after applying. Fresh nail polish or lipstick. Daniel stared at the smudge. It was crimson red. Rosie didn't wear makeup. Her hands always smelled of bleach and soap. Her nails were short and clean, but Ivy lived obsessed with her appearance. And that night, the night of the dinner, Ivy was wearing a cream dress. Daniel closed his eyes, forcing his photographic memory. He replayed the dinner. He remembered Ivy tossing the napkin. He remembered her hands on the table. Her nails were painted crimson red, and she was touching them up on the sofa before dinner. Daniel turned the vial. On the bottom, stuck to the glass, was a tiny hair. A long, dyed, blonde hair. Rosie had dark brown hair, and she always wore it in a tight bun. The world spun around Daniel. Reality hit him with the force of a train. Rosie had told the truth. Ivy had switched the bottles. Ivy had poisoned her own nephew. Ivy had planted the watch. Daniel felt the urge to retch, but he choked it back. The sadness vanished, replaced by a rage so dark and deep it terrified him. He crushed the dirty vial in his hand. He had put an innocent woman in jail. He had left his son at her mercy. Daniel pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. He dialed a number he didn't call often, his criminal defense attorney, the most ruthless one, a man who charged thousands of dollars an hour and could get the devil himself out of hell if paid enough. "Alonzo," Daniel said, his voice sounding like crushed gravel. "I need you to go to the Central Police Station, right now. You're getting someone out." "Daniel, it's 3 in the afternoon. I have a meet—" "I don't give a damn about your meeting," Daniel shouted, kicking the trash container. "You are going to the police station and you are going to free Rosie Jenkins. Prepare a lawsuit against the state, against the police, and against whoever is necessary. I want her out today." He hung up without waiting for an answer. Then he dialed another number, his company's head of security. "Martinez, I want you to access the security camera server at my house. Ivy said they were under maintenance that night. I want to know if that's true, and if anything's been deleted, I want you to recover it. Whatever it costs." Daniel put the phone away. He looked up toward the second-floor window, where Ivy was likely trying on clothes or sipping champagne, believing herself untouchable. "Enjoy your last drink, sister-in-law," Daniel muttered, wiping a smudge of garbage off his cheek. "Because hell is coming for you." He walked into the house no longer as a defeated father, but as an avenger. He had to ask for forgiveness, but first, he had to serve justice, the painful truth. Daniel Vanderbilt stormed into his private office like a man possessed, double-locking the solid oak door behind him. The air conditioning was blasting, but he felt a suffocating heat beneath his skin, a toxic mix of adrenaline and guilt. Martinez, his head of security, was already there, typing furiously at a computer terminal with 3 monitors. Martinez was an ex-military man of few words and absolute loyalty, the only man Daniel trusted with his darkest secrets. "Tell me you got it," Daniel demanded, tossing the dirty bottle of Dormiex onto the desk like a grenade. Martinez didn't look up from the screen, where lines of code were scrolling at breakneck speed. Ms. Ivy requested a manual wipe of the local server at 10:45 p.m. tonight, claiming a privacy breach, Martinez reported in his deep, monotone voice. The tech on duty, a rookie she hired last week, executed the order. The house's physical hard drive is clean. Daniel felt his legs give out. He slammed his fist on the desk. Damn it! I told you to— But— Martinez interrupted, finally swiveling his chair to face his boss. She doesn't know about the mirror system, the ghost cloud we installed after the kidnapping attempt last year. Everything the cameras pick up is instantly uploaded to a server in Switzerland. She deleted the local copy. The original is intact. Daniel let out the breath he'd been holding. He leaned in close to the monitors, gripping the back of Martinez's chair with both hands. Play it. Main dining room, Tuesday night. Dinner time. Martinez clicked. The image popped up in high definition on the center screen. Daniel saw himself sitting at the table. He saw little Alex laughing in his high chair, saw Rosie, sweet and helpful, cutting up food, and saw Ivy. On screen, Ivy glanced at the camera for a split second with a cold, calculating look that froze Daniel's blood. Then, the scene unfolded just as he remembered, but from an angle that revealed everything his human eyes had missed. He saw Ivy drop her napkin on purpose. He watched as, while he bent down and Rosie turned at the noise, Ivy's hand moved with the speed of an expert thief. The bottle switch was so clear in the 4K video that Daniel could read the poison label right in his sister-in-law's hand. Pause, Daniel ordered, his voice cracking. The image froze at the exact moment Ivy unleashed her malice on the family. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, overcome by a wave of violent nausea. He had slept under the same roof as that woman. He had let her touch his son, and worse, he had condemned the only person who had actually protected the boy. There's more, sir, Martinez said, his tone turning grimmer. When you asked us to check the cams after the watch theft, I searched the service hallway footage. Look at this. The video feed switched. Now it showed the narrow corridor outside Rosie's room. The timestamp showed it was 2 hours before the police arrived. Rosie's door was open. Ivy slipped in, looking both ways to make sure no one saw her. She came out 30 seconds later with empty hands, but wearing a satisfied smirk that made Daniel's hands itch to strangle her. She planted the watch, Daniel whispered. The visual confirmation hit him like a physical blow. And Mr. Vanderbilt, I suggest you don't watch the next clip, but it's necessary for the legal file. Play it, Daniel ordered. It's from the boys' room this morning while you were at the office. Daniel forced himself to watch. The camera showed little Alex softly crying in his bed. Ivy entered the room. There was no one else. She walked over to the crib. Instead of comforting him, she leaned over him. The high-fidelity microphone picked up her words with terrifying clarity. Shut up already, you little burden. Stop crying for the maid. She's not coming back. And if you keep crying, I'm going to give you another dose of vitamins to make you sleep for 2 days straight. Did you hear me? Daddy doesn't love you. Daddy only listens to me. In the video, Ivy pinched the boy's arm hard. Little Alex screamed in pain and fear. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't break anything. He stood in absolute silence, a deadly stillness that was far more dangerous than any explosion of rage. He straightened up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with mechanical calm. Martinez, Daniel said, and his voice sounded like it came from a deep grave. Make 3 copies of everything. 1 for the police, 1 for the judge, and 1 for me. Send the original to the prosecutor's office for crimes against minors right now. Understood, sir. I'll call security to detain Ms. Ivy. She's at the pool. No, Daniel said, walking toward the door. Leave her to me, but first, I have to fix what I broke. I have to get Rosie out of that hell. Daniel walked out of the office. As he passed the main hallway, he saw through the large windows. Ivy reclining on a lounge chair, sunbathing in dark sunglasses, enjoying the millionaire life she thought she had secured. Daniel felt a primal urge to go out there and end her right then and there, but he held back. That would be too easy. She deserved to lose everything, her freedom, her money, her reputation, and her pride. And he was going to make sure that happened. He got into his sports car, ignoring the chauffeur. He started the engine with a roar that made the estate's windows vibrate and shot off toward the city, toward the central police station, driving like a man running from his own demons. Every red light was torture. Every minute that passed was another minute Rosie spent in a cell because of him. He remembered the look she gave him when they took her away. Check the tea. She had trusted that he would be smart, that he would seek the truth, and he had failed her miserably, blinded by the prejudices of his social class. He arrived at the station, slamming on the brakes. His lawyer, Alonzo, was waiting for him at the entrance with a leather briefcase and a grim face. "Daniel, this is madness," Alonzo started to say. "The judge on duty was at lunch. I had to move heaven and earth to get the immediate release order. The charges have been dropped due to lack of evidence, but the paperwork—" "I don't care about technical details, Alonzo." Daniel cut him off, taking the station stairs 2 at a time. "Is she free?" "Yes, technically, but they're processing her release." "Daniel, wait. You can't go in there like that. It's the temporary holding area. It smells like urine and despair. It's no place for—" Daniel pushed through the swinging doors, ignoring the protests of the officers on duty who tried to stop him when they saw a civilian bursting into the restricted zone. "I am Daniel Vanderbilt," his voice shouted, echoing off the dirty tiled walls. "I'm here for the innocent woman you locked up." The commissioner walked out of his office, pale. He recognized the millionaire instantly. He knew a lawsuit from Vanderbilt could end his career. "Mr. Vanderbilt, please, calm down. Miss Jenkins is in cell 4. We're just waiting for her to sign. Open the cell, now." Daniel followed the guard down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The smell was rank, a mix of stale sweat, dampness, and fear. They passed cells filled with drunks and criminals screaming obscenities at him. Daniel didn't even blink. He only had eyes for the end of the hall. The guard rattled the keys and unlocked the heavy metal gate of cell 4. Forgiveness. In the cell. The cell was small, damp, and cold. There was no window, just a naked bulb flickering on the ceiling, casting long, gloomy shadows on the peeling concrete walls. Sitting in the corner, on a metal cot with no mattress, was Rosie. Daniel stopped in the doorway, feeling his heart break in two. She no longer looked like the vibrant young woman who danced ballet in the backyard. She was curled in on herself, knees pulled to her chest, hugging herself to keep warm. Her blue uniform was stained with dirt from the floor of the patrol car. Her hair, usually tied back, fell in messy strands over her face. Hearing the gate open, Rosie lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she wasn't crying anymore. She had run out of tears. When she saw Daniel standing there in his impeccable $5,000 suit, contrasting violently with the misery of the place, her expression wasn't one of relief. It was absolute rejection. Rosie stood up slowly, leaning against the wall for support. She was trembling, but she lifted her chin. "Did you come to see if I've confessed yet?" she asked. Duh. Her voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable, but charged with a dignity that made Daniel feel small. "Or are you here to tell me they found another jewel under my pillow?" Daniel took a step into the cell. The guard tried to stay, but Daniel made a violent gesture for him to get out. The gate was left ajar. "Rosie." Daniel tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. He swallowed hard. "No, I'm here to get you out. I'm here to—" She didn't move. She didn't smile. "Is that so?" she said bitterly. And why? Did you run out of someone to clean the toilets? Or did your sister-in-law decide I've been punished enough? Because I know the truth, Daniel said, taking another step. He wanted to hug her, to beg for forgiveness with every fiber of his being. But the invisible wall she had built was impenetrable. I found the vial in the trash. I saw the security cameras. I saw what she did to you, and what she did to little Alex. At the mention of the boy, Rosie's eyes wavered for a second, but her wounded pride hardened once more. You should have believed me when I told you, she whispered, and a single furious tear rolled down her dirty cheek. I begged you, Mr. Vanderbilt, while they were dragging me away like a criminal. I begged you to check the tea, and you turned your back on me. You believed that because I am poor, I am a thief, that because I am a maid, I have no honor. Daniel lowered his head. Every word she spoke was a well-deserved stab. You're right, he admitted. And then Daniel Vanderbilt, the man who never bowed down to anyone, did the unthinkable. He got on his knees. He knelt on the dirty cell floor, ruining his designer trousers in the dust and grime. He looked up at her, his eyes wet with tears. I was an idiot, blind and arrogant. I judged you wrong, and I almost destroyed my son's life. That's why I don't deserve your forgiveness, Rosie. I know that. But I need you. Rosie backed away, bumping into the cold wall. Seeing the powerful Mr. Vanderbilt on his knees threw her off, but the pain of the humiliation was still fresh. 3 days in that hole, treated like trash. That doesn't just go away with some theatrical gesture. Please, get up, she said, looking away. Don't do that. I'm not getting up until you listen to me, Daniel insisted. I've dropped all the charges. My lawyer has already started the paperwork to clear your name. I'll pay you whatever you want, 10 times your salary, a house, whatever you ask for the damage I caused. Rosie let out a dry, painful laugh. Money? She looked at him in disbelief. You think this can be fixed with money? You rich people think you can buy everything. You break a person into pieces and then throw cash at them so they can glue themselves back together. My dignity doesn't have a price, sir. I'm getting out of here, yes, but I'm going back to my village, far away from your estate, far away from your snake of a sister-in-law, and far away from you. Daniel felt real panic set in. If she left, little Alex would be lost forever. He knew money wouldn't work. He had to use the only card he had left, the cruelest one, but the only real one. Slowly, Daniel took his phone out of his pocket. He looked for the video Martinez had shown him an hour ago, the security camera clip from that very morning. You have the right to leave, Rosie. You have the right to hate me, Daniel said, standing up and holding the phone out to her. But before you go back to your village, please, watch this. Rosie hesitated. Her instinct told her not to look, to just run out of there. But her heart, that treacherous heart that had grown attached to a child that wasn't hers, forced her to look at the screen. The video played. She saw little Alex in his bed, pale with dark circles under his eyes, staring into nothingness. She saw Ivy come in. She heard the insults. You burden. Daddy doesn't love you. She saw the pinch, heard the boy's heartbreaking cry, a cry that was calling out for only one person. Nana, Nana. Rosie felt her legs give way. She covered her mouth with her hands to stifle a scream. The phone slipped from her fingers, but Daniel caught it. He is letting himself die, Rosie, Daniel said relentlessly, attacking her kindness directly. Since you left, he won't eat, he won't speak. He's back in the wheelchair, and this time he doesn't want to get out. The doctors say it's severe childhood depression. Ivy is torturing him when I'm not there. Rosie sobbed openly, her resistance crumbling at the image of the little boy's suffering. "Why are you showing me this?" she cried. "It's cruel." "Because I am a desperate man," Daniel confessed, stepping closer and taking her hands. They were cold and rough, but he held them with a reverent gentleness. "I can't protect him alone. I don't know how to make him laugh like you do. I don't know how to make him walk like you do. If you leave, Ivy wins. And if Ivy wins, my son fades away." Rosie looked at Daniel's hands wrapping around hers. She looked into his eyes, which no longer held the cold detachment of a boss, but the desperate plea of a terrified father. "Promise me one thing," Rosie said, her voice trembling but firm, looking up to lock her warm brown eyes with his. "Promise me that woman will never come near him again." "I swear it on my son's life," Daniel replied, and the intensity of his voice made the stale air of the cell vibrate. "She is leaving that house today, and she will pay for every tear you have shed." Rosie took a deep breath, wiping her tears with the dirty sleeve of her uniform. She straightened up, recovering that inner strength that defined her. "I don't want your money, Mr. Vanderbilt," she said, "and I'm not coming back for you. I'm coming back for little Alex, because it's not his fault he has the family he does." Daniel nodded, accepting the harsh truth. "That's fair. Let's go. The car is outside." Daniel took off his suit jacket, a garment of fine Italian wool, and placed it over Rosie's shoulders to cover her dirty uniform and keep her warm. She was surprised by the gesture, but she didn't reject it. They walked out of the cell together. The police officers stepped aside as they passed, intimidated by the millionaire's presence and the strange dignity of the woman walking beside him. As they got into the luxury car, Rosie looked out the window. The sun was setting. "Are we going to the estate?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "We're going home, and we're going to take out the trash." The engine roared to life. Rosie closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer. She was returning to the wolf's den, but this time the alpha wolf was on her side. The war against Ivy was about to end, and Rosie was ready to watch her fall. It was a triumphant return. Night had fallen completely over the Vanderbilt estate, but the lights in the main hall shone with a festive intensity that felt obscene, given the circumstances. Inside, Ivy walked barefoot across the Persian rugs, holding a baccarat crystal goblet filled to the brim with vintage champagne. Classical music played softly from invisible speakers in the ceiling. She felt like the absolute mistress of the house, with the maid in jail, and little Alex turned into a drooling vegetable in his room. The path to total control of the Vanderbilt fortune was clear. Daniel was destroyed, vulnerable, ready to be manipulated by an attentive and concerned sister-in-law. "To your health, little sister," Ivy toasted to the empty air, mocking the memory of Daniel's late wife. "In the end, I'm the one who kept the throne." The heavy sound of the front door bursting open shattered her fantasy. The music stopped abruptly as someone cut the system from the entrance panel. Ivy turned around, annoyed by the interruption. "Daniel!" she exclaimed, quickly composing her mask of concern. "You're finally here!" I was so distressed I had to have a drink to calm my nerves. "How is the boy?" "Did you manage to—" Her words died in her throat. The crystal goblet slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor, spilling the golden liquid and scattering glittering fragments everywhere. Daniel Vanderbilt hadn't entered alone. At his side, walking with her head held high despite her dirty and wrinkled uniform, was Rosie. She wore Daniel's suit jacket over her shoulders, draping her like a protective cloak. Her face was pale, etched with the exhaustion of the jail cell. But her eyes burned with a fire Ivy had never seen in a maid before. "What?" What is she doing here? Ivy stammered, taking a step back, feeling the air suddenly grow thin. Daniel, have you lost your mind? She's a criminal. She tried to kill your son. Daniel stepped into the center of the room. His footsteps echoed with lethal authority. He didn't scream. His silence was far more terrifying than any scream. He stopped in front of Ivy, ignoring the broken glass crunching beneath his shoes. "Pick that up," Daniel said in an icy voice, pointing at the shards of the glass. Ivy blinked, confused. "What?" "I said pick up your mess because that is the last thing you will ever break in this house." Ivy let out a nervous laugh, desperately trying to regain control of the situation. "Daniel, you're tired. The stress is getting to you. That woman has brainwashed you. The police found the watch in her bed. I saw her give him the poison." Rosie stepped forward. She took off Daniel's jacket and folded it carefully over the back of an armchair, revealing her stained uniform. "You didn't see anything, Mrs. Ivy," Rosie said. Her voice didn't tremble. It was the voice of someone who had nothing left to lose. "But the cameras certainly saw you." The color drained from Ivy's face. She went white as a sheet. "Cameras?" she whispered. "The cameras were off." "The technician told me." The technician wiped the local drive. Daniel interrupted, savoring every second of the terror that was beginning to dawn in his sister-in-law's eyes. "But he forgot to tell you I have a cloud backup. I saw everything, Ivy." Daniel pulled a thick yellow envelope from the inside pocket of his shirt. He threw it onto the coffee table with contempt. "I saw how you switched the vials. I saw your red nails on the poison label. I saw how you went into Rosie's room to plant the watch. And worst of all," Daniel took another step, invading Ivy's personal space, forcing her to back up until she bumped into the grand piano. "I heard what you said to my son this morning, Ivy." She tried to speak, but only a choked whimper came out. The reality of her downfall hit her with the force of a tsunami. There were no lies left to save her. "You tried to kill my son," Daniel continued, and now the contained fury began to vibrate in his voice. "Your own blood, for money." "He was never going to be normal," Ivy suddenly screamed, losing her composure, her face contorting into a grimace of hate. "He's a burden, Daniel, a hindrance." "You and I could have owned it all without dragging that wheelchair around. I did it for us." Daniel raised his hand, and for a second, Ivy thought he was going to hit her. She shrank back, covering her face, but Daniel stopped the blow in midair. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of becoming the victim. "I won't touch you because I'd get my hands dirty," Daniel spat. "But they won't have such qualms." Daniel snapped his fingers. The side doors of the living room opened. Martinez entered, followed by 4 police officers. The same ones who, hours earlier, had dragged Rosie away, but who now brought a very different arrest warrant. "Mrs. Ivy Vanderbilt," the commanding officer said in a solemn tone, "you are under arrest for attempted aggravated homicide, tampering with evidence, defamation, and child abuse. You have the right to remain silent." Ivy looked at the police officers, then at Daniel, and finally, her eyes locked onto Rosie. Rage blinded her. In a final act of savage desperation, Ivy lunged forward, claws out, screaming like a banshee, aiming straight for the maid's throat. "You servant! You ruined everything!" Rosie didn't move, frozen by surprise, but Daniel was faster. He intercepted Ivy halfway, grabbing her by the arm and spinning her around with brutal force until he pinned her against the piano. "Don't you even dare!" Daniel roared into his sister-in-law's ear. "If you touch her, I swear you won't make it to the police station alive." The officers rushed at her, handcuffing her tight. Ivy kicked and spat, her elegance completely destroyed. "This isn't over," she shrieked as they dragged her toward the exit. "I am a Vanderbilt. I have lawyers." "Daniel." You're going to regret this." Rosie watched the scene with a mix of horror and relief. When they finally hauled Ivy out and the door clicked shut, silence returned to the estate. But this time it wasn't a heavy silence. It was the silence of air that had just been purified. Daniel stood staring at the closed door, breathing heavily. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up. He turned slowly toward Rosie. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse. Rosie nodded, but she didn't smile. Her gaze shot immediately to the stairs leading to the second floor. "It's not over, sir," she said softly. "Now the hard part begins. Little Alex is upstairs, and he needs us." Daniel looked at her with a new, deep admiration. That woman had just watched them take away the devil who ruined her life, and her first thought was still the boy. "Go," Daniel said. "Go to him. I'll handle the police. You handle the miracle." Rosie didn't wait another second. She ran up the stairs, forgetting her exhaustion, forgetting her hunger, driven by the only force that mattered in that house, the love for a child who wasn't hers, but who had stolen her heart. The difficult recovery. The second-floor hallway was in shadow. Rosie tiptoed toward the door of little Alex's room, which was slightly ajar. Her heart pounded hard against her ribs. 3 days had passed, but for a traumatized child, 3 days can be an eternity. She pushed the door open gently. The room was plunged in darkness, lit only by the bluish glow of a star-shaped nightlight. The smell of medicine and confinement was palpable, replacing the fresh scent of talcum powder and lavender the room used to have. In the bed, a small lump under the sheets barely moved. Rosie entered slowly. "My prince," she whispered. The lump tensed up under the blanket, but there was no answer. Rosie approached the edge of the bed and sat down carefully on the mattress. She gently pulled back the sheet covering the boy's head. What she saw broke her soul. Little Alex was awake, his eyes wide open, staring fixedly at the wall. He had deep, dark circles and pale, waxy skin. He didn't turn to look at her. His gaze was empty, as if the cheerful little boy who'd taken his first steps in the backyard was gone, leaving behind just a frightened shell. "Little Alex, it's me, it's Nana." Rosie reached out to stroke his cheek. The boy reacted with a violent spasm. He shrank away from her touch, letting out a whimper of pure terror, covering his head with his arms as if he expected a blow. "No, no," the boy sobbed into the pillow. "Go away, mean lady." Rosie pulled her hand back as if she'd been burned. "No, my love, I'm not the mean lady." "It's Rosie. Look at me." But little Alex wouldn't look at her. The trauma of the last few days, Ivy's screaming, the pain of the shots, and the sudden abandonment had built a wall of fear. To him, any adult walking into that room was a threat. Besides, Rosie's hair was down and messy, and her uniform was so dirty you could barely tell it was blue. To the boy's confused, sedated eyes, she was a stranger. Daniel appeared in the doorway. He had come up quietly and was watching the scene with pain in his eyes. "He doesn't recognize you," Daniel said softly. "The sedatives have him confused, and the fear has blinded him." Rosie stood up from the bed, fighting back tears. She felt helplessness tightening her throat. She had come back, but it seemed she was too late. The magical bond had been broken. "He thinks I abandoned him," Rosie murmured. "And he sees a dirty, sad stranger. He needs safety." Rosie looked at her empty hands. She was missing something. Her gaze swept the room and stopped in the corner where the toys were kept. There, lying on the floor, forgotten by the German nurse and by Ivy, was a bright rubber object, a yellow glove. A spark lit up in Rosie's eyes. She turned to Daniel. "Sir, I need to ask you a favor." "Anything," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I need 5 minutes, and I need you to bring me music, the same music from the backyard." Daniel nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting her blindly. Rosie ran to the bathroom attached to the boys' room. She washed her face with cold water, scrubbing off the dirt from the cell. She gathered her hair into her usual bun, tight and high. She smoothed out her uniform as best she could, put on the clean white apron she always left as a spare in the boys' closet, and finally, she put on the gloves. Those bright yellow rubber gloves, loud and ridiculous to anyone else, but for little Alex, they were the symbol of joy. She stepped out of the bathroom, transformed. She was no longer the victim of the justice system. She was the Nana. Daniel had connected his phone to the room's sound system. The soft melody of a Tchaikovsky waltz began to fill the stale air. Rosie stepped into little Alex's line of sight. She didn't get close to the bed. She went to the center of the room where the lamp's light created a small stage. "Attention to the stage," Rosie announced in a clear, sing-song voice, ignoring the lump in her throat. "The Magic Gloves show is about to begin." Little Alex stopped whimpering. The tone of voice, he knew that tone. He slowly turned his head on the pillow. Rosie raised her arms in an exaggerated ballet pose. The yellow gloves shone in the dim light. She began to twirl clumsily, but with a grace full of love, making funny faces every time she passed in front of the bed. A step here, a hop there. "Who will catch the nanny who dances non-stop?" She hummed along. Little Alex's eyes focused. The haze from the medication began to clear before the strength of the happy memory. He saw the yellow, saw the bun, saw the smile. Nana," the boy whispered with a raspy voice. Rosie didn't stop. She kept dancing, inching closer to the bed with every twirl. "Where is my little dancer?" she asked, doing a pirouette. "I'm missing my partner. My gloves are all alone." Little Alex sat up slowly, propping himself up on his elbows. His body was weak, his muscles wasted away from days of forced immobility, but his spirit was waking up. "Nana," he said louder, and a small, trembling smile appeared on his dry lips. Rosie stopped at the foot of the bed. She made a theatrical bow, lowering her head to the floor and extending a gloved hand toward him. "May I have this dance, Mr. Alex?" From the doorway, Daniel had to bite his fist to keep from sobbing. He watched as his son, the boy who minutes ago was screaming in terror, stretched his pale little hand toward the rubber glove. "Yes," little Alex said. Rosie gathered him into her arms. She didn't lift him to take him to the bathroom or the chair. She lifted him to hold him. Little Alex buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of soap and love, and broke down crying again. But this time it wasn't a cry of fear. It was the cry of relief, of knowing he was safe. "I'm right here, my love. I'm right here," Rosie whispered to him, rocking him to the rhythm of the waltz. "No one is ever going to hurt you again. I promise you." Daniel entered the room and walked over to them. Little Alex didn't flinch when he saw his father. Seeing that Daniel was hugging Rosie with him in the middle, he understood that the bad dad was gone too. "I'm sorry, son," Daniel whispered, kissing the boy's head. "I'm so sorry." Little Alex looked at his father, then at Rosie. His legs dangled uselessly, weak as rags. The poison and the confinement had stolen the physical strength he had gained. "No, I can't walk, Nana," the boy said with sadness, looking down at his feet. "I forgot how." Rosie lifted his chin with her gloved finger. "You didn't forget, my love. They're just asleep. And you and I are experts at waking sleeping things up, right?" "Tomorrow?" the boy asked hopefully. Tomorrow, Rosie promised. Tomorrow we start fresh, and the day after, and the next day, until you run faster than your dad. Daniel watched the scene. They had gotten the boy back. Yes, but the damage was done. The physical recovery would be a brutal battle. Little Alex was weaker than ever, and the shadow of what Ivy had done to him would take a long time to fade. But as he watched the yellow glove caress his son's back, Daniel knew they had the most powerful weapon of all. They had Rosie, and this time, he wouldn't let anyone take her away. The accident at the pool. The midday sun beat down hard on the travertine tiles of the backyard. 2 weeks had passed since Rosie's return, and the Vanderbilt estate had recovered a rhythm that, although fragile, was full of hope. Little Alex still couldn't walk on his own. The muscle weakness caused by the poisoning and the trauma of the confinement had left him dependent on the wheelchair. But his spirit, that was healing. "Catch me if you can, little turtle," Rosie shouted from the other side of the terrace. She was wearing her usual uniform, with those bright, yellow gloves on her hands, making big, exaggerated gestures like a soccer cheerleader. Little Alex, sitting in his little adapted wheelchair, was laughing his head off. His arms, which used to be so weak, were now pushing those wheels with fierce determination. "I'm coming for you, Nana," the boy squealed, pushing himself forward with all his might. Daniel was watching the scene from the balcony of his office on the second floor. He was on a call with investors from Silicon Valley, but his attention had drifted completely to the backyard. Seeing his son laugh was a deal worth way more than any building. He smiled faintly, watching Rosie run toward the edge of the pool area, dancing and spinning to get the boy moving. However, there was one detail that both Daniel and Rosie missed. 20 minutes earlier, the new gardener had taken out the bags of dry leaves through the side gate of the safety fence surrounding the pool. It was a tempered glass fence, designed to be invisible but secure. But the magnetic latch hadn't clicked shut. The gate had stayed ajar, just a few inches, invisible to the naked eye, but fatal. "Faster!" Rosie cheered, running backward, moving away from little Alex so he'd chase her. She passed right by the pool gate, without touching it, but little Alex, all excited and with his eyes locked on those yellow gloves waving in the air, turned his wheels way too hard. One of the front wheels of the chair hit the glass door. Instead of bouncing back, the gate gave way. The boy's momentum and the slight slope of the drain did the rest. "Nana!" The scream of joy turned into panic in a split second. Rosie stopped dead in her tracks and spun around. Her eyes went wide with absolute horror as she watched the wheelchair cross the safety threshold and tip toward the crystal-clear water. "Little Alex!" The splash was deafening. The chair and the boy disappeared beneath the turquoise-blue surface. From the balcony, Daniel dropped the phone. He didn't even scream. His body reacted before his brain even caught up. He vaulted over the balcony railing, landing on the roof of the porch below and rolling onto the grass, ignoring the pain in his ankles. He ran like he'd never run in his life, but Rosie was closer. She rushed to the edge. She saw little Alex underwater, strapped into the chair's seatbelt, struggling, his eyes wide with terror, sinking to the bottom. Rosie couldn't swim. She'd been terrified of deep water since she was a little girl, but she didn't think for a second. "I'm coming, my love!" she screamed and dove into the water, uniform, apron, shoes, and all. The shock of the cold water knocked the wind out of her. The weight of her wet clothes dragged her down immediately like an anchor. Rosie kicked desperately, swallowing chlorinated water, fighting the survival instinct screaming at her to surface. She opened her eyes underwater, which burned from the chlorine, looking for the boy. There he was. The chair had hit the bottom. Little Alex was thrashing around trying to free himself from the seatbelt. Rosie pushed herself toward the bottom, feeling like her lungs were about to burst. Her gloved hands slipped on the metal of the chair. Her fingers, clumsy with panic, struggled with the buckle. Click. The belt came loose. Rosie grabbed little Alex by his shirt and pushed him upward with all her might, using her own legs to propel him toward the surface. She watched the boy's small body rise toward the light, but the effort left her out of air. She tried to go up after him, but her long skirt had gotten tangled in the footrest of the sunken wheelchair. Rosie pulled, but it wouldn't budge. Water filled her mouth. Darkness began to close in on her peripheral vision. The last thing she thought as she saw little Alex's little legs kicking toward the surface was, "At least he's safe." Daniel arrived at the edge of the pool just as little Alex's head broke the surface, coughing and waving his arms. "Daddy!" the boy screamed before sinking again. Daniel dove in. With 3 powerful strokes, he reached his son, grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and literally threw him toward the steps of the shallow end. "Stay there!" Daniel roared. He looked around. The water was calm. "Too calm! Rosie!" he shouted. No one answered. Only bubbles could be seen rising from the bottom of the deep end. Daniel submerged again, opened his eyes in the water, and saw the blue and white blur at the bottom, motionless, tied to the metal chair. Daniel's heart stopped. He swam down with desperate strength. He reached her. Rosie's eyes were closed, her loose hair floating like a dark halo around her pale face. She looked like a broken doll forgotten at the bottom of an aquarium. Daniel grabbed the fabric of her dress and pulled violently, tearing the uniform to free her from the metal. He hugged her by the waist and kicked toward the surface, feeling the dead weight of her body. They emerged with a crash of water. "Hold on! Don't you dare leave me!" Daniel shouted as he dragged her toward the edge. He pulled her out of the water with difficulty, laying her down on the hot tiles. Little Alex, soaked and trembling, crawled toward them, crying. "Nana, Nana, wake up!" Rosie wasn't breathing. Her lips were blue. There was no movement in her chest. Daniel knelt beside her, placed his hands on her sternum, interlocking his fingers. 1, 2, 3, "Foo," he counted aloud, compressing her chest with rhythmic force. "Come on, Rosie. Breathe." Daniel covered her nose and breathed air into her mouth. Her chest rose, but when he let go, there was no voluntary exhalation. "Nana!" little Alex screamed, touching her cold face with his little hands. "Please!" Daniel kept pumping. Sweat ran down his forehead, mixing with the pool water. Panic was a wild animal clawing at his chest. If she died saving his son, he wouldn't be able to survive it. It wasn't just guilt. It was the heart-wrenching pain of losing the only woman who had brought light into this house. "Don't die. I forbid you to die," Daniel yelled, his voice breaking into a sob as he continued CPR. A minute passed, 2 minutes, an eternity. Suddenly, Rosie's body jerked with a violent spasm. Water gushed out of her mouth. She coughed a hoarse, horrible sound, gasping for air in desperation. Daniel slumped back, resting on his heels. Gasping for air, Rosie rolled onto her side, retching up more water, coughing until her throat burned. She opened her eyes, disoriented and red from the chlorine and lack of oxygen. The first thing she saw was the bright blue sky. The second was little Alex crying beside her. The boy whispered in a cracked voice, trying to get up. Daniel stopped her, placing a hand on her shoulder, but this time not with authority, but with infinite tenderness. "He's okay. He's alive, thanks to you." Rosie looked at Daniel. The millionaire was soaked, his white silk shirt clinging to his body, his hair a mess, and tears streaming openly down his face. She had never seen him like this. So human, so vulnerable. "Thank God," she murmured, before her eyes rolled back and she fainted again from exhaustion. Daniel scooped her up into his arms immediately. "Security!" he shouted toward the house. "The car!" Now, the awakening and the promise. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the private room at Hampton's General Hospital. It was a constant, hypnotic sound that marked the difference between life and death. Daniel Vanderbilt was sitting in an uncomfortable armchair next to the bed with his head in his hands. He had been there for hours. He had refused to leave even when the nurses told him visiting hours were over. Nobody dared to kick out the owner of the building. Little Alex was sleeping on a sofa bed on the other side of the room, exhausted after the trauma. Daniel had brought him because the boy refused to eat or sleep if he wasn't close to his nanny. Daniel looked up and watched Rosie. She was pale, with an oxygen cannula in her nose and an IV in her arm. She looked so small in that big hospital bed, so fragile, and yet she was the strongest person he knew. Daniel reached out and took her hand, which rested limp on the white sheet. His fingers grazed the rough skin of her hands, hard-working hands that had cleaned his house and saved his son twice. "I don't know if you can hear me," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "But I need to tell you this before you wake up and put that barrier of, 'Yes, sir,' 'No, sir,' back up between us." He stroked the back of her hand with his thumb. "I thought I had everything under control. My company, my money, my life. I thought little Alex was a problem that could be solved with the best doctors. I was such an idiot." Daniel let out a sad laugh. "You arrived with your ridiculous gloves and your smile, and you disarmed my whole world. You taught me that being a father isn't about paying bills. And today, when I saw you at the bottom of that pool, I realized something even more terrifying than seeing my son in danger." Daniel leaned in closer, gently kissing Rosie's knuckles. "I realized that I can't live without you. And I'm not talking about the nanny. I'm talking about you. About Rosie." Her fingers moved slightly under his. The rhythm of the heart monitor sped up a little. Rosie's eyelids fluttered. They opened slowly, revealing those warm brown eyes that had obsessed Daniel for the last few weeks. She was confused, blinking against the white light. "Mr. Daniel." Her voice was a barely audible thread. Daniel straightened up quickly, but he didn't let go of her hand. "I'm here. Easy now. You're in the hospital." Rosie tried to sit up, but the pain in her chest stopped her. She grimaced. "Little Alex, where is he?" Daniel pointed to the sofa. "He's sleeping. He is perfectly fine. He only swallowed a little water. You took the worst of it. You stopped breathing." "Rosie, you were dead for almost 2 minutes." Rosie closed her eyes, processing the information. She remembered the weight of the water, the darkness. She remembered pushing the boy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was careless. I didn't see the open door. It's my fault." "No." Daniel cut her off vehemently. "Don't you dare apologize. You saved his life again. If there's anyone to blame, it's me for not checking that gate, or the gardener I already fired. But you are a hero." Silence fell. Rosie looked at her hand trapped between Daniel's. She felt the warmth of his skin, the firmness of his grip. She withdrew her hand gently, feeling uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. He was her boss. She was the maid. Those lines weren't supposed to be crossed, no matter how fast her heart was beating. "I have to get back to work," she said, trying to return to normal. "When can I get discharged? The house must be a disaster and—" "You're fired," Daniel said it abruptly. Rosie froze. She felt as if a bucket of cold water had been thrown over her. "What?" she asked, her eyes filling with tears. "Why? You said it wasn't my fault. I saved the boy." "Please, Mr. Daniel, don't do this to me. I have nowhere to go." Daniel got up from the armchair. He paced the room a bit, nervously running his hand through his hair. He turned to her with the serious expression of a businessman about to close the deal of his life. "You are fired as a domestic employee, Rosie Jenkins. I am not going to let you clean another bathroom in my house. I won't allow you to wear a uniform, and I definitely won't allow you to live in the servants' quarters." Rosie was confused and terrified. "So, You're kicking me out on the street? No. Daniel approached the bed again. His eyes shone with a feverish intensity. I am offering you a new contract, a permanent, indefinite one. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a legal contract. It was a drawing. A clumsy drawing made with crayons of 3 figures: a tall man in black, a boy in a chair, and a woman in a bright yellow dress and a crown. Little Alex made this while we were waiting for you to wake up, Daniel said, showing her the drawing. He said this is his family. Rosie looked at the drawing, a lump forming in her throat. Sir, I don't understand. It's simple. Daniel took a deep breath, dropping his defenses. I'm offering you the position of little Alex's legal mother. And Daniel hesitated, searching for the exact words, but decided to be direct, just like in his story, and the position of life partner to his father. If she'll have me. Rosie's jaw dropped. The heart monitor started beeping faster, giving away her emotion. Are you proposing to me? She asked incredulously. To me? The one who smells like chlorine? The one with no last name and no fortune? You have the only fortune I lack, Daniel replied, sitting down, on the edge of the bed and looking deeply at her. You have kindness, you have courage, and you have my son's love. And if I'm not mistaken, I think you also feel something for this bitter old man. Rosie laughed through her tears. He isn't that old, and he's not that bitter anymore. Daniel smiled, a real broad smile that took 10 years off his face. So what do you say? Do you accept the promotion? I'm warning you, the work is hard. You have to put up with me and raise a boy who thinks you're a superhero. Rosie looked at little Alex's drawing again. Then she looked at Daniel. Everything she had ever dreamed of, a family, love, a home, was right there, served on a silver platter by the man she had learned to love in silence. But Rosie was Rosie. She couldn't stop being who she was. I accept, she said, and Daniel felt like he could breathe again. But on one condition, Mr. Vanderbilt. Daniel, call me Daniel. What condition? A new car, jewelry, trips? Rosie shook her head, smiling mischievously. No, the condition is that no one else touches the backyard. That is still my territory. Daniel let out a laugh of relief. He leaned toward her, brushing his lips against hers in a first tentative kiss, soft, full of promises. It's a deal, he whispered against her mouth. But you're going to have to get yourself some yellow gloves with diamonds, future Mrs. Vanderbilt. And who's going to clean the backyard with yellow gloves if I'm the missus? She asked jokingly. We'll hire an army, said Daniel, kissing her again. You just have to dance. At that moment, from the sofa, a sleepy little voice broke the romantic mood. Dad, Nana, can I have ice cream now? Daniel and Rosie pulled apart, laughing. The nightmare was over. The family, that strange and patched-together family, was finally complete. The complete, final family. 6 months had passed since the accident in the pool. 6 months that felt like 6 years because of the intensity of the battle fought inside the Vanderbilt estate. But this time it wasn't a battle against an evil sister-in-law or corrupt cops. It was a war against atrophy, against fear, and against medical prognoses that remained guarded. The afternoon sun bathed the estate's backyard garden, the same place where Rosie had danced for the first time with her yellow gloves, the same place where she almost lost her life saving little Alex. But today, the garden didn't look like a war zone or a place of loneliness. It was unrecognizable. Hundreds of white flowers, roses, lilies, orchids, decorated every arch, every chair, and every corner. An immaculate white carpet stretched from the terrace to a makeshift altar beneath the great old oak tree. There were people, lots of people. The cream of East Coast society was sitting there on golden chairs, murmuring and fanning themselves. Daniel's partners were there, curious to see the maid who had married the most coveted bachelor. The doctors were there, including the skeptical Dr. Berman, invited out of courtesy. And in the front row, wearing a custom-made security suit, was Martinez, the head of security, crying discreetly behind his sunglasses. In the master bedroom, the one that used to belong to Daniel's late wife and that had remained closed for years, Rosie was standing in front of a full-length mirror. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a French lace wedding dress, simple, but of an elegance that took your breath away, hugging her figure and falling in a cascade of silk to the floor. Her hair, which was always in a tight bun for work, now cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders, adorned with tiny, real flowers. But Rosie wasn't looking at the dress. She was looking at her hands. On the mahogany vanity, right next to the bridal bouquet, rested a pair of yellow rubber gloves. They were old, worn out from use, with fingertips stained by bleach. "Are you ready, ma'am?" asked a timid voice from the door. It was Lupe, the new housekeeper Daniel had hired. Under Rosie's strict supervision and interview, of course, the girl was looking at her with absolute adoration. To the domestic staff across the entire city, Rosie Jenkins had become a living legend, a modern-day Cinderella who didn't need a fairy godmother, just courage. Rosie smiled and caressed the rubber gloves one last time. "Don't call me ma'am, Lupe. I'm Rosie. And yes, I'm ready, but the most important thing is missing. Where is my knight? Mr. Daniel is already at the altar. He's biting his nails off, even though he's trying to hide it." "I'm not talking about that knight," laughed Rosie. "I'm talking about the other one, the little one." Just then, the bathroom door flew open. "I'm ready, Nana," shouted an excited voice. Rosie turned around and felt the tears threatening to ruin the makeup that had taken the stylist 2 hours to apply. Little Alex was there. He was wearing a miniature black tuxedo, identical to his father's, with a red bow tie. His blonde hair was slicked back with gel. He looked older, stronger, with a mischievous sparkle in his eyes that he had completely regained. But the most shocking thing wasn't his clothes. It was where he was sitting. He was in his wheelchair. Rosie felt a little pang of anxiety in her chest. The last few months had been brutal. 6-hour physical therapy sessions every day, screaming, crying, falling. There were days when little Alex would say, "I can't," and want to throw in the towel. There were nights when Daniel would lock himself in the study to weep out of helplessness, watching his son suffer. The recovery hadn't been an instant movie miracle. It had been dirty, sweaty, painful work. And up until this morning, little Alex still needed the chair for long distances. His legs had strength, but his balance remained fragile. "You look so handsome, my love," said Rosie, crouching down carefully so she wouldn't wrinkle her dress, getting to his eye level. "Do you have the rings?" Little Alex tapped his jacket pocket. "They're right here. I won't lose them. Dad said if I lose them, there's no cake." Rosie laughed and kissed his forehead. "Good. Are you sure you want to do this? We can push the chair if you're tired. No one will judge you." Little Alex shook his head. His expression turned serious, that seriousness he had inherited from Daniel. "No, Nana. You saved me from the pool. You got me out of bed. I'm going to bring you the rings. It's my job." "It's your mission, soldier," Rosie corrected with a wink. "My mission," he affirmed. The music started playing downstairs. It wasn't the traditional wedding march. Daniel had granted her whim. The first notes of Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers floated through the air, soft and magical. "It's time," said Rosie, standing up. They went down the stairs. Lupe pushed little Alex's chair up to the garden entrance. Rosie took a deep breath, holding onto the arm of Don Anselmo, the oldest gardener of the house, whom she had asked to walk her down the aisle since she didn't have a father. The garden doors opened. The murmuring of the guests stopped instantly. Hundreds of heads turned. Daniel, standing beneath the oak tree, felt the world stop. When he saw her, he forgot to breathe. He forgot about his millions, his companies, his problems. Only she existed. The woman who had arrived with a cardboard suitcase and given him back his life. Rosie walked down the white carpet. Every step was a victory over her past, over poverty, over the injustice of prison. She walked with her head held high, smiling at Daniel with a promise of eternal love in her eyes. She reached the altar. Don Anselmo kissed her on the cheek and placed her hand in Daniel's. "You look..." Daniel searched for the word, but the right one didn't exist. "You look like the miracle that you are." "You don't look too bad yourself, for a bitter old man," she whispered, and they both laughed, breaking the solemnity of the moment. The justice of the peace cleared his throat, ready to start, but Daniel raised his hand. "Wait," Daniel said, turning toward the center aisle. "The ring-bearer is missing." The music changed slightly, rising in volume in a dramatic crescendo. All the guests turned toward the start of the white carpet. There was little Alex sitting in his chair. The silence was absolute. Many guests looked on with pity, expecting to see the nanny push him, but then little Alex did something that left East Coast high society speechless. He put the brakes on the chair, rested his hands on the armrests, took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a second, just like Rosie had taught him to focus his superpower, and stood up. A gasp ran through the audience. Little Alex wobbled a bit, his legs shaking under the weight, but he steadied himself. He straightened his jacket with a dignified gesture. Daniel squeezed Rosie's hand so hard it almost hurt. They both held their breath. They knew he could do it. They had seen it in therapy, but he had never done it in front of so many people. Over such a long distance, under so much pressure. Little Alex took the first step. Firm, sure, he took the second. His patent leather shoes struck the white carpet. Clack, clack, clack. He walked slowly, focused, staring intently at his father and his Nana. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the flowers. He only looked at his goal. Halfway there, his right foot caught slightly on the carpet. He stumbled. The crowd gasped. Daniel made a move to run toward him, but Rosie stopped him, squeezing his hand. "Let him," she whispered, with her heart in her throat. "He can do it." Little Alex didn't fall. He swayed, waved his arms, and regained his balance. He looked forward, scared for a second. Then, Rosie did something forbidden in wedding protocol. She let go of the bouquet with one hand, raised her arm, and subtly made a twisting motion with her hand, as if wearing an invisible glove. The dance gesture. Little Alex saw the gesture, smiled, straightened his back, and kept walking. He didn't walk the last 10 meters with fear. He walked them with pride. He picked up the pace, almost running the last 2 meters until he threw himself at his father's legs. "I made it!" little Alex shouted, raising his arms. The garden erupted. These weren't polite applause. It was a standing ovation, thunderous, real. Even hardened businessmen were weeping. Women in full makeup wiped away tears, not giving a damn about their mascara. Daniel scooped his son up into his arms, kissing him, while Rosie hugged them both, burying her face in her future husband's shoulder to hide her happy tears. "You did it, champ," Daniel whispered in his ear. "You're the strongest man I know." Little Alex pulled the rings out of his pocket. "Here, Daddy. Now marry Nana so she never goes away." Daniel set the boy down, who stood by his side, holding on tight to his father's pant leg, barely steady, but standing. The ceremony went on, but nobody was paying attention to the legal words anymore. Everyone was mesmerized by the energy of pure love radiating from this unlikely family. Then it was time for the vows. Daniel took Rosie's hands and looked deep into her eyes. "Rosie," Daniel began, his voice ringing clear through the microphone. "My whole life, I was taught to measure the value of things. How much does a building cost? What's a stock worth? I was taught to protect my wealth from strangers. And when you showed up, I treated you like a dangerous outsider. I accused you, I judged you, and I almost destroyed you." Daniel paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "But you showed me I was actually bankrupt. I was an emotional beggar living in a palace of gold. You brought true wealth into this home. I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about laughter, dancing, forgiveness. I promised to spend the rest of my life trying to repay that debt, not with checks, but with love. I promised to take care of you, respect you, and never, ever forget that my real fortune arrived the day you walked through the service door wearing a blue apron." Rosie, with tears streaming down her face, took the microphone. "Daniel, I came here looking for a job just to survive. I was scared. I thought rich people didn't have hearts." She looked at little Alex, then back at him. "But I found 2 broken hearts that just needed a little glue and a little dancing. I promised to be your wife, your friend, and your partner. I promised to love little Alex as if I gave birth to him myself, even though in my soul I already did. And I promise that even though I'm wearing this silk dress and diamonds now, I will always, always be the woman who's ready to put on those yellow gloves to scrub away any sadness that tries to get into our home. I now pronounce you husband and wife," said the judge, his voice cracking with emotion. "You may kiss the bride." Daniel didn't wait. He grabbed her by the waist, dipped her back like in a classic movie scene, and kissed her with such passion that the guests erupted in applause and whistles again. Little Alex laughed and covered his eyes with his hands, but peeked through his fingers. The party was legendary. No stiffness, no boring protocols. There was music. There was food. And most of all, there was dancing. Daniel danced with Rosie. Little Alex danced too, held up by his father, swirling around with Rosie. Even Martinez danced with Lupe. Toward the end of the night, as the guests started to leave and fireworks lit up the Hampton sky, Daniel and Rosie sat on a secluded garden bench, watching little Alex play with other kids on the grass, tired but happy, refusing to get back in his wheelchair. "Do you know what happened to her?" Rosie asked softly, popping their bubble of happiness for just a second. He didn't need to say her name. Daniel just nodded, his face hardening a bit. "The trial ended yesterday. Ivy was sentenced to 25 years without parole. The videos, the doctor's testimony, the proof of financial fraud. It was overwhelming." Daniel let out a sigh, letting go of the weight of the past. "She'll never hurt us again. She's going to rot in a cell, all alone with her ambition." Rosie rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. She didn't feel joy at someone else's misfortune. Her heart was too good for that. But she felt an immense peace. It was justice, divine, and human. "It doesn't matter anymore," she said. "She is the past. We are the future." Daniel hugged her, kissing her hair. "I have a gift for you," he said suddenly. "More gifts, Daniel? You already gave me a wedding, a house, a family. This one is different." Daniel pulled out a small black velvet box. Rosie opened it, expecting a diamond, a necklace, something flashy. Inside the box was a small gold charm. It wasn't a heart. It wasn't an initial. It was a tiny cleaning glove perfectly sculpted in gold, with a small yellow diamond set in the center. Rosie burst out laughing, that crystal-clear laugh that had made the millionaire fall in love on the very first day. "I'm serious, very serious," Daniel smiled. "So you never forget where your power comes from." Rosie put on the necklace. The little golden glove shone against her skin. "Thank you, my love." They stood there hugging, watching their son. In the distance, little Alex was trying to do a clumsy pirouette on the grass, laughing up at the stars. Life wasn't perfect. There would be hard days, there would be falls. But in that estate, where silence and coldness used to reign, now there was warmth. Daniel Vanderbilt, the man who believed money could buy everything, looked at his wife, the former maid who had taught him how to live. "I thought my fortune was the money," Daniel whispered to the night wind, repeating the truth that now defined his existence. "But my true fortune arrived wearing an apron and cleaning gloves." Rosie squeezed his hand. "And now," she said, standing up and pulling him toward the empty dance floor, "that fortune needs to dance." And under the moonlight, the millionaire and the maid, now husband and wife, danced their own waltz while their son ran around them, free, strong, and happy, closing the chapter of pain forever and opening the book of a life full of love. The end. Did you cry at the ending? Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories where love conquers money and justice always arrives. Leave us a yellow heart in the comments if you believe in Rosie's miracles.